Hey, what is going on? And we are back here with the Vigor Life podcast. And today's guest is none other than Lee Boyce. And what's so cool about this, we've been catching up and they're trying to get you down to the Vigor Ground Fitness and Business Summit during the chaos. And it was tough to do. But now here you are. And I know in the future we'll have you live at the summit as well. But, you know, you're one, I love having you on because you're one of those guys that really kind of does it in the real world, but also educates about it. And then you also write for mainstream media, which is like this kind of beautiful triangle, right? Where you got a person that's doing the right stuff in the real world, educating, I would say, at a university, and then also going into, places like Men's Health, Men's Fitness, and writing about it, which is so dope. And those are kind of like the three, I think, things that I want to dive in with you about. And I want to start here because I do think this is important, is, breaking down your journey, how you got here. I mean, from the training, how did you get into, speaking as a professor? How did you get into writing? And, where did it all start? What was the catalyst for it all?
So I always like to sort of start back when I talked about back in high school when I was into sports a whole lot, and running track and playing basketball and then volleyball and football and baseball and all these other sports that I'd played for varsity team. And that athletic inclination that I had brought me toward looking for something along those lines in school classes that I would choose in high school. So when I learned that there was a class in exercise science or kinesiology in grade 12, I didn't only take it once, I took it twice. I took it in my second last year and then in my last year of school as well. And I did, there were two different schools, but I did well in the course both times. And it just intrigued me. And the different angles that each school used from one school to the other to deliver the content, that intrigued me as well. And I just wanted to keep learning. So took that into university in kinesiology. And then I was running track as well. I got recruited to the track and field team there at university, the university level. So I competed nationally. And initially, my goal was actually to take what I was learning and where I was going with things and work with chiropractic or physiotherapy as a more of a stream. And the decision to get into personal training instead was based on the fact that I just much preferred the idea of working with people who are, in the general sense, healthy rather than people who are always injured, And I wanted to be not on a table with them, but more so in the field with them, working with them. So training their strength and training their conditioning, whatever else. So that's what got me into the field. And, I have to say that 90% of the things that I've sort of been able to accomplish, whether you want to talk about teaching, whether you want to talk about writing, it sort of came from making sure that I honed the skill set of making sure that I had my basics down pat, which is being a good trainer. And, I didn't go, I shouldn't say that by and large, but I didn't go looking for a lot of the opportunities that came my way. A lot of they came to me. Like teaching was offered to me. I didn't go applying for jobs for being a prof, working like that. So with writing, that was a huge aspiration of mine. I definitely worked very, very hard to get into publications and whatnot. So that's where the narrative shifts just a little bit, because that was one of my major goals when I was in my early 20s. And that was able to work out and get the snowball effect as well. So that's what sort of was the backstory behind all of that.
See, this is great because you made a point that is so important. You said, I honed in on being great at the foundational skills as a trainer. And then a lot of things opened up for me. And I want to kind of dive into what, after, like I said, all the coaching that you've done, the training that you've done, what do you believe? And again, listen, I also know that, you might not have I got a list of 10, but, some of the things that come to your mind are like, hey, look, these are the foundational skills that you have to master that maybe some will think are the basics. And how does that look like, to open up the doors for having a lot of clients, but then also having opportunities like you've gotten? What are the basic, or should I say the foundational things that you believe every coach should work on?
What I'm noticing, and I will say this even from a teacher's perspective right now, is what I'm noticing is a serious deficiency on for a lot of people is a knowledge of just basic anatomy. And it's actually, it can be a little bit surprising to a lot of veteran trainers out there when they see that, like, you have a 22, 23-year-old coach who's just getting into the industry and they're applying for jobs. And I have a lot of contacts who are in the business of hiring trainers onto their staffs. And they'll come back and tell me things like, I'll ask them a question of what is the function of the gastrocnemius, or what are two functions of the glutes or hamstrings or whatever it is. And they can't answer the question, or at least not. And that's, in my opinion, something that you want to go as much as possible without having situations like that be the hindrance to you being able to get the job. Know the body, understand the body. If you have to read about it, if you have to take a supplemental course to do that, whatever it takes, understanding how the body sort of is made just in the basic level. And it doesn't mean you have to know the obturator and the pectineus muscle and all those things, but just knowing, hamstrings, lats, glutes, origins, insertions, what their actions are, those kinds of things. Not only that, but like from a biomechanical perspective as well, it can take you a really long way in terms of just understanding how somebody is performing on the gym floor, just understanding what things can influence the way the body is going to perform and what they're going to respond to, what they might not respond to. It rounds out your breadth of knowledge and your application of that knowledge so well when you just have a good understanding of, I always like to say, anatomy, biomechanics, and generally physics of movement. And those things can go a long way. And they, in a way, they don't even have as much to do with actual training. And that's the cool part about it. It's just like, if you understand these foundations, then it's going to translate so nicely over to actually working with a moving body, somebody who's doing a bench press, or doing a strict press, or whatever it is.
Do you have an idea? So what do you feel is the reason that that's happening? I mean, I've got my own thoughts around this, but what do you think is making, I would say, that foundational knowledge get lower and lower and lower if you look at the people coming into the industry?
I think two things. So the first thing is the fact that the industry is pretty unregulated, right? And because it's pretty unregulated, the certifications or the qualifying standards to make somebody a trainer or make somebody able to say they're a trainer, it's becoming easier and easier to do that, whether it's the weekend cert, whether it's a new cert that no one's really heard about, whether it's whatever it is, right? So there is that side of it, but I don't put as much merit on that statement as I do for the fact that my second point, which is the fitness industry and its saturation of quick, short, YouTube-based, Instagram-based, TikTok-based information that's out there, where you can get some knowledge in a 30-second clip, but then you're bombarded with so many other competing philosophies. You're bombarded with so many other fluffier fitness methods. You're bombarded with a whole bunch of things that contraindicate the good stuff that you've learned, and so on. There's just an influx of information that's being thrown at a person, and it's not really given with as much context as can be given because there are short clips. So you're getting 10 million short clips of all shapes and forms and all kinds, whether it's a strength training tip, or whether it's a powerlifting tip, or whether it's bodybuilding training, conditioning work, athletic sport specific stuff, you name it. And then I think that even if a person doesn't feel confused, they might be confused just because there's so much information that's going into their minds. And some of it might not be good information. Some of it might be bad information. Some of it might be extremely polarized information, and so on. And then it gets away from those foundational basics that I was talking about. There isn't too much content that's out there that talks about, okay, these are your lats. This is where they originate. This is where they insert. This is what they do. Here are 3 great exercises to hit your lats. The end, because it's not going to be out there that is going to get a lot of views. It's not interesting for a lot of people, and it's not going to make for a massive profile or a huge following or anything like that.
I mean, you make a great point. I want to just also shout out this, that like, I feel that if you truly want to be in this game for like the long term, like you have to, I used to play basketball. Basketball was kind of saved my life. So I always have analogies from ball, but the greats I remember watching Kobe, practice, and he's 17, 18 years into it. And he's practicing the basics, pull up jumper, right? Come across the street, like everything's a basic, and he's still drilling it. And while I had a minor in exercise science and kinesiology, I'm very fortunate to where the people that I grew up with in the industry, Eric Cressy is a great friend, and Mike Robertson, that were very also geeky. And so I would basically, dive into the anatomy of everything. Right. But I feel like I say this so to say that going to study that, even if even if you're coming from a background, you didn't go through a lot of that, you came into the industry because it changed your life. You're an enthusiast and then turned into a coach. go and study that, because it truly does create such a solid foundation. And the other thing too, it gives you more confidence. It certainly gave, like when I was studying all that stuff and downloading the apps of, anatomy and like seeing it where everything is at and going through anatomy books, like I got more confidence, because I think that, competence builds confidence, and learning that stuff makes you go like, hey, listen, like I understand this better now. I know why this is moving the way that it is. And it will just give you a firmer foundation to build on. So, I mean, I love that you make that point. And actually, this is kind of like just an entering question as far as like, when you're educating now, right? What is your approach? I really would love to know your approach when it comes to educating and what you're teaching.
So I teach fitness and health promotion at teach courses within fitness and health promotion diploma program at a college here in Toronto. And, it's a good blend of like lecture based and practical, very, very practical material. And it's very geared toward people who directly want to get into personal training as their career, or some form of athletic training as their career path. So there is a contingent of students who might use it to bridge to other things, but then there's a contingent of students who really want to do this stuff. And so what my classes are, I tend to teach a lot, oftentimes the on-campus internship, which is super duper practical. The exercise prescription courses as well. There's level 1 and level 2 of that, depending on what semester student you are. So those courses, they really lay down the foundations of programming, lay down the foundations of, things like exercise technique, biomechanics of the movements and so on too. And it's honestly, it's a really fun course. It really is a fun course. So I've been on both sides of teaching the labs and the lectures as well. One might be a little bit more administrative than the other side. But I've sort of been all around the map, and those have turned into mainly the 3 courses that I'll be involved with each semester. My approach to teaching those courses, my approach to teaching in general, and even with my approach to speaking at different events and conferences, is I believe in having information that sticks, right? That's the term that I like, that I've heard one time and that I sort of ran with. It's not about just giving information, it's about giving information that is sticky or that sticks. And so when I've been in situations before, and I've known people in situations before, where they pay a bunch of money to go to a conference or to a symposium of some sort, into an event, and then they will spend 8 hours for the whole day or whatever, or 3 8-hour days for a weekend worth of that learning. And then they come away with like 2 or 3 things that they can take to the actual gym floor for themselves and their clients in the next week. And to me, it's like, well, I mean, you just had 24 hours of instruction, and you come away with like 3 points that you can take home after spending $1,000 to go there and another $500 to accommodate yourself and whatever else, right? And to me, it's like, man, like if I can do something where the information might not be so research profound or crazily in-depth, but it's got some practical things that's like, okay, I remember this, and this all from that one talk. That's where I want to go with it. And so when it comes to teaching, same thing. I'll tell my students, I'll often tell them, be like, okay, so talk to me about the shoulder and different exercises that will engage your back. Oh yeah, so this exercise is great for the retractors of the shoulder blades, and it's going to involve external rotation of this and that. And it's like, no, stop. Don't use those terms, because you'll never use them in the field with clients. We know that you know what those terms are. Tell me something if I was a client. Okay, it'll help you pull your shoulders back, pop up your rib cage, and get you more range of motion at your shoulder like this. Perfect, right? So I like sort of applying things like that, where it's like, okay, how many ways can I make this translate to the real world scenario that you're going to be in as much as possible, right down to the vernacular that you're using. How much of this can you really translate into the real world? We're going to take our noses out of the books. We're going to break a few rules here. We're going to realize that in such an industry, practice is going to be the most important thing. And the way that you're learning, it's got to be a little bit more fluid, as long as the principles of training are being respected under that umbrella of, you have to have those foundational movements. Let's say squat, hinge, push, pull, carry. Those kinds of things are important for a client. Now, the things that go under that category, for example, okay, what kind of squat, what kind of hinge? Now, those are the things that you have to make on a case-by-case basis. Every trainer who's good is going to believe that, for a good quality, safe squat, you're going to have to go down with a pretty tall spine. You don't want to flex at the spine. You want to keep your heels down the entire time, those kinds of things. However, you talk to somebody who's maybe trained under Poliquin versus someone who's trained under Ripto, you're going to hear different philosophies on just more details of that squat. And this is the gray zone that a lot of young trainers, I think, would benefit to understand that there's a lot of it depends here. And if I can get that point across, as well as understanding that, speaking in the most clinical or the most theoretical and, all that kind of esoteric jargon, it's not going to help anybody. At the end of the day, I think that they're going to be better off for all of that.
Awesome. I think there's two things that you mentioned that I kind of want to go into. So you said practical programming, that's one of the things you teach. I definitely want to dive into that. And then the second, which I love, is that you're preparing people for the real world of coaching, which is communication. I think that one is actually a really big bottleneck. A lot of times, just being able to communicate to your clients in their language, the language that they understand, right? Because that's, I'm like, you got to translate this stuff. That's how I look at it. It's like, you got to be a translator of the geeky to the, I completely get it, right? Whoever you're talking to. Is it a 10-year-old? Is it a grandma? Is it a pro athlete? You got to help them understand how it works for them and what it means to them that is meaningful to what they're doing. And so on the practical programming, like, let me take, if I went through, all the workbooks that I've ever gone through, whether NSCA, ISSA, NASM, all that good stuff. Like, when you get to coaching and teaching, what are some things that may not be written in those books, but you're like, I teach this because it's practical programming?
I like thinking about, especially when it comes to things like the history or how clean of a slate the client themselves have, and what I mean by that is when a client comes to you and says, I need a program or whatnot, I could pick up, a good book that's all about, hypertrophy training if the person wants to build muscle or whatnot. But I mean, the program can't tell whether or not the client is older or younger, has a long training age, an old training age, or a young training age. Has a history of injury, has a history of surgeries, has certain leverages that may or may not correspond very well to certain lifts that are being really, really hammered away at. All those kinds of things can be a huge factor. What kind of lifestyle that client has as well, in the sense of maybe they're dedicated to it, but maybe they have a 60 hour per week job that has them sleeping 5 hours a night. And all those kinds of things, like, it might still be great to get out and train 5-6 days per week, but is that doing more good or bad for you in terms of your health overall? Your adrenals might be destroyed. Your androgen receptors might be blocked up. Like, there's all kinds of stuff like that factors in that a fixed program or a generic program might not be able to tell. Now, having said that as well, talking about with a student who might be in the internship, for example, a student in my internship classes who's looking to work with a client or who's looking to get ready to start into the industry, one thing that I would definitely encourage them to do in terms of breaking away from things is realizing that, like, okay, you don't have to necessarily train the largest muscle groups first in the workout if there's a contraindication or a good reason why going smaller to larger is a smart idea for that client. I could give a bunch of reasons why doing a hamstring curl before doing sets of squats would be fantastic for a client who's got bad knees or whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. So those kinds of critical thinking, those kinds of ways of sort of, breaking away from what the formula might tell you to do, what the books might tell you to do, I think that those are useful interpretations of training that can go a really long way for somebody. And it can also open the floodgates for people to start applying that method of thinking to other scenarios that I'm not even mentioning here.
Yeah, see, this is cool because I mean, look, I love templates. I think templates are useful, right? But what you're talking about is creating a toolbox where a person can make a decision and go like, oh yeah, I'm going to use this template, but you made a great example, but I use a ton of primers. I mean, even for myself, like, I'm 41, I've done a lot of training, a lot of athletic things in my life. And it's like, there's a lot of days where I'm like, all right, hamstring curls, calf raises, single leg stuff as a circuit to prime for instance, when I'm going to squat. Yeah. And what squat do I use? I don't barbell back squat anymore, right? Now, the thing is that if you see a template, again, that is useful, but you don't have this frame to look at it from a different perspective, you just go like, okay, template, insert a squat pattern, insert a and now you're essentially not doing that person you're doing them a disservice, because you could have done something that would be better, but maybe it's counterintuitive to, or if you read a Ripto book, if you read this book or that book, it's not talking about that. And that's the practicality of it, to have as many scenarios to be able to make a decision, but at least you got more stuff in the toolbox than just a hammer to choose from and make a better choice for that client.
Yep. 100%. And like, that's the thing, like there's so many scenarios. What if a person has a poorly equipped gym? And so all of a sudden they don't have access to certain equipment that the program asks for. What modifications? What happens if you're the trainer in a situation where your gym is busy and you had this part of the program and you're supposed to have them do, squats in one of the only cages that's available and it's not available? Well, what will you do instead to create volume for them? What if the client walks in one day and says, hey, you know what? I feel horrible. My back, I threw out my back like a week ago and it's flaring up on me. I could squat, but I don't know if I should. That kind of thing. Right? Those kinds of, the what's the word I'm looking for? Just the unexplained things, the things that are coming out of left field for a person. They have to understand how to roll with those kinds of punches and what kinds of things to do instead. Having a bigger arsenal of tools, like you said, in the toolbox is going to be a huge way to do that.
Do you do these scenarios? Talking about conversate about them.
Yeah, I do. And one of the subjects of each lab week is usually there's a different subject each week. And so like 2 weeks ago, we had minimal equipment training. That was one of the things. So you can have scenarios where we create case studies and say, okay, create a 1-day program. You have 15 minutes to write up a nice 1-day workout based on this case. This is a person, they want general conditioning. All they have is a mat, 2 light dumbbells, 3 sets of bands, and 1 heavy kettlebell. What can you do with this stuff that you got? Stuff like that is it's pretty useful, and again, super duper practical. So I really like doing little assignments like that for a student and for the students in the classes, and it usually works out pretty well. And when you have different groups doing all sorts of different scenarios, then everyone gets to bounce the ideas off one another, learn from each other, and so on. And then I like to give my feedback, of course, too. I
love that. It's for anybody that's listening to that's a coach. I would highly recommend this, because this is kind of like our internships, right? But I think that writing out scenarios, right? So you have, every scenario that you can imagine, right? Like from somebody blew out their back, somebody has no cartilage in their knee, somebody has minimal equipment. You just kind of go down the list and use those examples in your teaching of, again, you could be, whether it's you own a gym and you're teaching your other coaches, you're the fitness director. There's a lot of scenarios where you're mentoring somebody under you. And if you have a group setting, I think there's so much benefit to doing that, because everybody gets their input. And now you can kind of go through like what might be the best choice, but everybody's learning. The thing is, I don't see that a lot. And this is why I love the practical side of it, because whatever textbooks that you read, once you get in the real world, it can be a shit show. What I mean by a shit show, right? It's like, all right, you get a group training of 50, especially our peak with team training, which is our large group training. We do charity boot camps with 150 people in it, right? How do you organize that? How do you coach 50 new people and make sure you pick exercises where things can't go crazy? You get a military unit. They get 3, like I was doing an in-staff for the Fort Lewis strength and conditioning, where they're like, yeah, we don't even know what we're going to get that day. So we might get a box and it's got a trap bar up to 315. We might get this. And I got like 50, 60 guys with completely different fitness levels. Right. And so small group personal training, there's a strength program, but we might have a new person come in this week and there's been a minor assessment on it, but like, you're going to have to adjust. This is the real world stuff. And, we've had folks that have done a master's in exercise science and kinesiology, didn't have as much practical, and were basically just like deer in the headlights, right? Because they're trying to churn through like what they've learned, and it's like, this doesn't fit the box of what's going on. And so I love that you're doing that, because I think every person should have as much of that as possible. I'm actually I'm gonna bug you about this. So you should probably create courses of what you're teaching. So that a lot of people can learn from it, because again, like you're in the real world, your foundations, and you're creating toolboxes for people to be ready when they go, rather than, and I'm all about like, look, learn as you go. Obviously, like you need the experience, but why mess up a whole bunch? Yeah. If you could come out the gates, already being more prepared, I think.
Yeah, strongly agree with that sentiment. The idea of the thinking that, passing one written exam and maybe a 10-minute practical evaluation is all that it takes in order to, there's a lot of people out there who might do that and who might pass that and think that they're set. And that's the wrong path right there, because, okay, we know it's unregulated. We know that it's an easy, in the general sense of the term, pretty easy to become licensed to do this. But if you think that you're ready for any scenario that comes your way, or that you have all the knowledge you'll ever need, well, that's absolutely not true, right? And so when somebody gets complacent or rests on their laurels, for lack of a better term, after they've gotten a passing grade on their certification exam, or they've passed their practical exam, and then they think that, okay, well, you know what, I have all the knowledge, and then they stop trying to learn. It's not even, they're probably even below ground zero in terms of the level they need to learn from. That's also why I encourage people to, I like getting people to start working with large box gyms and commercial gyms as their first kind of
Hell yes.
Doing things that are in the boutique club area, or trying to go on your own right at the beginning. I mean, okay, maybe you'll make a little bit more per session if you get enough clients to even make it worth your while, right? But if you stay in that world, you don't have the opportunity to really get hit with a whole bunch of different kinds of client cases. You don't get the chance to work with, boutique clubs usually have a very homogeneous mixture of people in the first place, where it's like, lots of business executives who might be in a higher income bracket and in a certain age category as well, right? You don't get the kid, you don't get the, you don't get the female client, you don't get the obese client, you don't get this, that, and the third, just giving these little examples there, compared to just having one kind of client that really dominates that sort of culture there.
Mm-hmm.
You might not get the athlete, you might not get the power lifter, and so on and so forth. Whereas if you go to a box gym, you probably get a little sprinkling, at least a sprinkling of every different kind of client, because that's sort of like it's a common space that a lot of people will probably go and sign up for and get a membership at. You'll have the 18-year-old, you'll have the 70-year-old, you'll have the person who's in great shape, you'll have the person who's not in great shape, and so on and so forth. These are the types of things that can really, really help give you the right, good kind of challenges as a trainer, especially a young one. But B, when you are part of a big staff of trainers too, 20, 25 trainers or whatever it is, what a gym might lack in the idea of, pushing for numbers and volume and what have you done for me lately, and a poor rate per session and all that stuff, makes up for with how many different trainers on staff you can also learn from, how many different contacts you could make, how many different, clients that you can take on, and so forth. And I think that's a very beneficial thing. And it's coming from a guy who spent the first 4 years of his career in exactly that scenario, box gym.
Same. So, I mean, I started a gym in Slovenia, came here, started from scratch, went to LA Fitness and then Vision Quest. And it was exactly that. And here's the thing, during that, I might have been like complained about, because you may not attach to necessarily the values of the company or whatever else. But I'm so grateful for it, because the amount of volume that you get. And here's the other thing too. What is happening there? Well, you have hundreds and hundreds of leads in front of you every single day, and you're handed people every single day, which is, once you get into your business by yourself, you realize you have to make that happen all the time by yourself. And it's one of the hardest things to do, because there's coaching in the business of coaching. And it's exactly what happened. Is like, one, if you want to be the busiest person, you have to start having a gift of gab. You have to start learning about sales to a foundational degree, right? And the other thing too is other people get to see you coach, which I think is one of the most powerful things, because that's how I got clients, that other people were going like, hey, like, what are you doing with that person? Like, I've never seen that, but like, it seems interesting. And I'd say like, hey, listen, I got a 30-minute in like 30 minutes. If you want to take a 30-minute session with me, somebody canceled today, you want to jump in, I'll take you through it. Right. And it'd be like, yeah, boom, right? All of a sudden, I deliver value on the spot. I sit down for a strategy session. I do so much of that. And then for people that were training there for like 3, 4, 5 months, they're seeing clients change, going like, holy, what the hell is he doing? It's like, well, he's training with Luca, right? So you don't get that, starting off, either even going to a smaller space, or going something that's really specific, sports performance. So we train just these types of folks. What I will say, and I don't know if you kind of agree with this, is that ideally, so this is kind of like this optimal thing, working in a setting like that, and an intern under somebody that's been in a game that really understands training. And then you can see them work and get all the kind of like explanations and the whys, and essentially like an internship of a person that's got, the 10,000 hours, 20,000 hours, whatever it may be. Because now you can go back and apply it and have this great pool of people that you can experience training with. I think that helps you like really skyrocket your growth.
So one like that 100% agree with that. And I'm surprised that I forgot to talk about this one factor. To any young trainer who's out there, here's something that I really believe is that, and this is something that I personally did as well, is today I have, even literally last night, I got an email from somebody saying, I'm out in whatever state. Can I do some kind of mentorship or internship or something with you that I can learn from you? Said, listen, like I don't tend to offer that. I don't do that. I'm not in the business of doing internships. I just never did that with my career. However, anybody who's in town who's contacted me to do the same thing, this is what I've always told them. And this is me responding to that email. This is what I've always told them. I've said, I don't offer internships or mentorships, but why don't you do some training sessions with me? Why don't you be my client? And that way,
Yes.
firsthand, by going through the actual stuff, programming that I prepare for you, you could ask me questions, you could feel what the workouts feel like, etc. And having said that, I'm bringing myself to the point of saying this, is that when I was 21, and 22, all those years, especially those years, I hired my favorite coach, the best coach that I could in my gym, in the gym that I worked for. I worked with, and he helped me put on size. He helped me get strong and so on. Those kinds of things were very important. I learned so much. I remember all those sessions like they were yesterday, and they stuck with me, possibly among the top tier of all the things that I've ever learned in the industry. Some of the stickiest information that I ever received was the time that I spent being a client myself. You learn about programming, you learn about how it feels, you learn about what these kinds of things can do. You see the results of doing things the correct way as well. So that was coming from somebody who was a university level sprinter, who was a trained athlete at some degree, all that sort of thing. Being able to put your possible ambitions or whatever it is aside and say, I'm going to put programming and training in the hands of somebody else for a period, not only to get results, but also to learn from them. It went a really, really long way for me. And I'm really glad that I did that. And, even up until, before the pandemic hit anyway, up until a few years back, I was still getting coached. I'm always sort of seeking out coaching from somebody in my circle of contacts, my colleagues and so on, that I really respect. Most recently was my boy Brad Thorpe over at ISOFIT. So he really put me through some isometric training, and it's gone a long way for me. And I use a lot of that stuff myself too, those methods.
See, that's so great. Now you were ahead of the game to be doing that at 2021. I love that. But man, like that's seriously. And I think today it's much easier, because think about, I know that like when I started coaching people like 17 years ago, or, when I started gym 16 years ago, is like you couldn't really, you had to read the books or buy the DVDs, or, you'd go on Elite FTS or TNATION or whatever else it may be, which obviously phenomenal resources. But today you can, you got YouTube, you got social media, you can follow somebody and go, man, that's really interesting. And then do they have a product or resource? If they're in your area, reach out to them and go like, hey, I want to get sessions, right? Or a gym that inspires you, a coaching gym. Like you can go there, you can sign up for membership, you can get training. It's so much more readily available. But I think it's more the principle that you're talking about that is key. Like how, do you want to learn like the fastest ways possible? Is like get coached, ask questions. There's nothing better than that. But again, like I would say, I really hope that everybody that's listening is hearing the fact that, you did that at 2021. And I think that was just like the boop, the jump start button that really helps you. Because I always, for instance, what I would do is when I'm reading something, and when I'd get coached, same thing. I've gotten coaching for like 20 plus years. And even when I was a pro athlete, I always had coaches, and I would be like, hey, listen, I read this thing, but we're doing this thing. Like, I don't understand. Like, isn't that counterintuitive? And when you have somebody that can go like, well, listen, like, yeah, this works in this setting, but here's what's going on with you. And here's why we're not doing that. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. Right. That bridging the gap is so good. And then that person would be in a lot of cases go like, hey, listen, I need you to go read this thing. I need you to go watch this video. I'd watch it and be like, oh man, okay, this is starting to make sense. right?
Yeah.
So it's like, it just speeds stuff up so much. I think to get it from the real world of somebody that's gone through that same thing. It was like, yeah, when I started, thought the same thing. Then I was coaching this long. Then I learned from this guy. Then same thing. I love that you said that, the isometric training, you went to do that. I've been diving super deep into Alex and the Terra stuff. And I've been using ISOs a lot, but like his, Alex and the Terra stuff and isometric training is like, I think world-class, top 1%, and just open a whole world for me. And I feel like I know a whole lot, but I also feel like I don't know anything. You know what I'm saying? So that's been cool. But like, it's important that you have this type of, that you have a value of curiosity and staying open-minded and seeking out somebody that's better than you, or even if it's in one area that you want to improve, it's a game changer.
And it usually ends up being, in my opinion anyway, more valuable than any theoretical certification or anything like that too. It's, again, when you're talking about the sticky information, all that stuff, usually all of that stuff that you're doing physically with your coach or whatnot, that all sticks usually. And compare that to, a certification where a lot of it is just regurgitating info that you've taken in for the sake of passing this exam. Then I get my papers and then I'm out. It's just not the way to look at this industry. It's not the way to approach this stuff, because it's such a practical based industry in the first place that if you don't have, if you haven't learned the ropes through practice, then you're going to be off on the wrong foot.
Let me ask you this too. How much coaching, like training, are you doing right now with clients?
I'll give you a typical fairly decently busy week. I'll usually have, I have school on Tuesdays. So I'm working Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, possibly Fridays and Saturdays. And I'll usually see a maximum of 4 people per day on those days, but you'll say reliably three a day.
Okay. So that's a good decent amount. Everything is one-on-one, or you do semi-private?
I'm pure one-on-one. I've always been a one-on-one guy. I've never really been into the semi-private game or the group fitness game. So it's always been one-on-one for me.
Okay. So that's cool. Cause I wanted to, obviously at this point in time, we'll dive into, the getting clients part, but I'm also interested in, you've made a name for yourself. You got a really good foundation, and the people that you're training, have you come to kind of a, what's Lee's 80-20, meaning the 20% of the things that you do to get 80% of the results when it comes to like practical programming. If it was like, do you have a template? And I get it. I'm the same where it's just like, there's a lot of different stuff going on. I got trained a pro rugby team, elite NFL guys, then it's like kids, it's all over the place. But, what would you say, could you go like, most of the time I do this?
So first of all, the dominant majority of my clients are the typical, the average Joes, for lack of a better term. They're the middle of the road clients who are general population. So I have a sprinkling of other kinds of clients in there, but it's mainly, the Bob from accounting, the Deborah from finance types. So having said that, most usually, and they're usually middle-aged as well. So most usually I like following, especially if they're, relatively consistent. And for me, consistency would be 2 to 3 days per week that they're training, and possibly an extra workout on their own. But oftentimes they might not even have the time for that or whatever. But anyway, those clients I would normally follow, or I like to sort of go under the guidelines or umbrella of, one day is vertical pushes and pulls, the next day horizontal pushes and pulls. And if there's a third day, then I go back to vertical pushes and pulls again with different exercises within that as well. So your vertical pushes and pulls, like your squat pattern, your deadlift, your overhead press pattern, or versions of these things, of course, that would be on one day. Horizontal stuff would be row patterns and so on, core work, planking, things like that. Bench press or push-up kind of work, chest kind of exercises, of course, inverted rows. I talked about rows already. Dynamic movements like walking lunges and you name it, leg presses. These are all going to be under that second day. And then on the third day, if we did squats on day one, another vertical push or pull would be the deadlift pattern and so on. And we follow other things. That could include some accessory work as well. But, I'll usually contain things in that kind of way with a little bit of space for a little bit of fun stuff as well, if that's not already fun to begin with.
I love that. See, the thing is, I keeping stuff steady. But I've been a big fan, honestly, like even in my own training, and maybe just because I've been doing it for a long time, like I understand the importance of, having obviously a set structure. but like I'm 75-25 or 80-20s, like 20%, I might change it even every training session and still stay within the guise of, if I have a push-up, I'm going to do a push-up. I'm going to change that push-up up. But 75-80% of it is going to be similar. But I love that you said that. You actually, Jay's a big fan of, I would say, kind of that programming as well. That's another one of the templates, because I stay under templates. One of the templates is like push-pull legs, that we'll use if it's a three time a week. And this is kind of like what I teach the team, but others is to, like, all right, if you have a client that's a 2-day a weeker, right? Here's options, and options are picked based on what type of person are they, training age, do they have like injuries, this, that, the other. There's 2 options. Okay, then if they're doing 3 times a week, here's 2 options. If they do 4 times, then there's a whole bunch more options, obviously, right? And then we'll do it in like in Instas and do scenarios, just kind of like what you talked about. But I always love hearing that, because, you know, what you're doing in the real world and what's working well. And what are some things that you found, especially with your clientele? Unless, like, I would say a lot of my gym, the biggest percentage would probably be the same clients as you have, for sure. And what are some things that, like, let's say in the last 5 years, you know, as you've been evolving and your experience has grown more and more and more, what have you found where you're like, man, I thought this and like I've completely dropped it, but then here's some things that I thought that maybe were not a practical thing in programming, but now I'm doing a whole bunch of it, and it's a staple. You know, what do you think that's changed there?
The use of more body weight training, for sure, in the last 5 years has definitely made itself a real surge in my training, not only personally, but with clients too. Very, very important to be able to handle your own body and be able to understand your groundwork, and, you know, just realize that, you know, a deadlift isn't a be all and end all when it comes to a display or an expression of your posterior chain strength, for example, you know, or that a squat or being able to squat to a certain strength standard, like double body weight or whatever, is so relative to so many different things, and so many different factors are at play there. And so you can't just look at that, right? So all that is just to say that, yeah, those kinds of things, body weight work and all kinds of supplementary exercise like that, have entered in for sure. Like the primers we were talking about before, whereas it's like, oh, biggest exercise first. Well, not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Yep.
So much is based around a client's goals and their history as well. And the third thing that I have to say has made a real impact on my training lately. And would I say the 5 years? Yeah, maybe 5 or 6 years. It's 2022 now. So maybe since about 2016, I've really been talking about leverages and anthropometry and all that sort of thing a whole lot. And so considering like a back squat being a main lift for a lot of people, for example, or a bench press being a main lift on a pushing day, on a chest day, or whatever have you. Well, can there be a new main lift for this person based on what their leverages are and what's going to keep
that?
Are we going to keep on looking at hammering away at this bench press? Or are we going to say, okay, you know what? From now on, your new main lift for horizontal press that you can go heavy on and really push it, it's going to be a pin press where it starts 4 inches off of your chest. And it's going to come to a dead stop every time. And we're not going to look at the eccentric side of it, and so on and so forth, right? Are we going to look at a back squat, or are we going to change it up to a front squat? Are we going to back squat with the same rebounding tempo of all people do it? Or are we going to go for a slow negative and freeze at the bottom? This is a way to now reestablish what you even conceive your PRs as. So instead of going for your 3-rep max that was at 250 pounds, well, how much can you do when you do it that way that I said, 4-second eccentric and a dead stop at the bottom? Maybe you could only do 185 that way. Guess what? That's your new 3RM. When you hit 250 looking like that, we're talking. You're probably pretty different, and you're probably going to feel pretty different while you're doing that too. So these are the things that have sort of changed my perspective, and changed my perspective so much so that, and this is actually the first time on any public platform that I've ever said this. So it's been leaked, but I'm going to say it here for the first time ever, is that I have a book that is out, or that's coming out in the next couple of weeks. So by December 1st, I've got a book coming out with my co-author, Melody Schoenfeld, and that is going to be all about this subject: anthropometry, leverages, and how strength training is affected by them. It's published by Human Kinetics, so big deal company, and they're going to be definitely publicizing that themselves too. Going to be on Amazon, all over the place, and we're really excited for it. 15 chapters, 288 pages, medical illustrations, you name it. It's all in there. So yeah, it's going to be a market that's not really touched.
I was bugging you, and there you are, dropping in a podcast. I was like, you gotta teach some of this stuff. Well, there you go. One, we're gonna put the link in the show notes for sure, and I'm definitely gonna what I love to do is just get a book from my whole team, right? And especially from people that I respect that are doing great work. But that's so powerful. Like, I'm trying to just snatch ideas here that for people that are listening is like, what if, right, you selected new foundational base lift for your clients, right? And you can communicate this frame as like, hey, look, this is a better lift for you. It's more joint friendly. And we're going to be able to see how you improve without you beating yourself up, actually feeling good, getting stronger. Again, maybe it's a pin press with a bench. Maybe it's with a football bar. Maybe it's trap bar off of blocks. Because again, I was just talking to a client about this the other day. They go like, well, a real deadlift is off the floor. And I'm like, do you know who made the plates this size? They're like, no. Do you know why they made them this size? I'm like, no, me neither. Somebody just made this shit up. Like somebody just was like, this is the size of the plate. You know what I mean? Like, so it's kind of like, it's all arbitrary. I'm like, do you feel good when we lift it like that? Yeah, I don't feel my back at all. Okay, great. Like maybe you'll get to the floor for sure, but this is your current strength, foundational lift. And they get stronger and are happier. And that, just to have that and go like, hey, have this categorization of exercises. What are better fits as this base strength exercise?
Yeah.
And like, you're doing them a much bigger service, and they're going to be happier, better, get stronger, not get stuck in this cauldron of like, oh my God, I can't, I lifted, but now I'm hurting, or, I'm tight, so I can't really push. And you avoid all of those just by making better choices right there.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the name of the game is you move well and get stronger while moving well. And if weight training or a certain exercise are hurting you and it's not, and you're narrowly escaping injury with every repetition you perform of this variation of a movement, is it really worth it? When you're 23 or 25 or whatever, and you can recover like that from doing something that's wrong or missing a rep or whatnot, then you might not put too much mind into this. But when you're, 30 plus, 35, I'm almost 36 myself, you probably have some injuries in your back pocket already by that point in your life anyway. You probably have been sidelined from something if you're somebody who's a regular lifter. And so you don't want to constantly be in that cycle of being on rehab and then being back and then going back to the things that got you in rehab in the first place. And then you get injured again and so on and so forth. And so, that was really brought home to me, even though I didn't get my knees injured by way of weight training. I was playing basketball at the time. That whole surgery and rehab and all that time off work and all that stuff that I went through, that was a real eye opener to me in terms of, okay, brings to question, okay, how am I training so that this sort of thing doesn't happen to me again, let alone in the weight room to make that happen. So I didn't want that to be my story. So I really
Yeah, but you brought that. I wasn't going to dig into this, but I do think there's valuable stuff here to be pulled out of it, because and I saw when you like injured your knees and then started rehabbing and everything else. What, because I think everybody's had that. I had like a really horrible back injury 15 years ago. Like bad, I was supposed to get a very invasive surgery, ended up rehabbing it. And, now I'm good pretty much majority of the time. And it's like the lessons there that I learned were like, mind-blowingly huge for me as a coach. But what were some of the things, even for you personally, that you learned going through that? Because look, that's serious adversity for somebody that's training and is like super, you're active, you're training, that's part of your life.
The futility of this industry as a whole and how well enough somebody needs to be in order to do their job is one thing that I guess first and foremost, because I went from being able to train clients and be able to do it to not at all, right? That's it. Mm-hmm. And you have to wait until you're better before you can get up, walk around, carry weights around, do things like that. And that was just my life. So I was in this wheelchair, then I was bedridden. That was it. Now, beyond that, as far as actually from a training perspective, things that I learned, I found that a positive attitude is a huge component, a key player for actually seeing results. If you believe that you're going to get better from something, then it's going to help your chances of getting better. If you believe that you're going to build muscle from the workout and you're doing the right things in your gym, of course, then you're probably going to have a faster rate of change than somebody who goes into it like a pessimist. So I think from a sports psychology, for a mental perspective, that's a pretty important one. And I also found that learning from much more, I don't want to say experienced lifters, just as lifters, but much more just older people in your gym to find out what has made them last the test of time for so long. I love having conversations with the 60, 65-year-old lifter who's in great shape, and you can see that, and you're like, man, so have you been squatting and deadlifting and bench pressing all these years to maintain this physique and to have this, or what? Most of them don't say that. They say, I stopped deadlifting so long ago. Now I do this instead, or now I do that. And I still do these versions of these kinds of movements. But as far as barbell squats, nah, man, I don't do that anymore. And so they say, oh, I focus a lot more on my mobility. My nutrition has taken top tier, all these different things that come into the picture to round out somebody's total fitness. Those are things. And I guess the other thing that I learned as well is that, there are 11 components of fitness, and a lot of people only like to talk about like 2 or 3 of them. And so, when we're talking about like strength, power, coordination, muscular endurance, cardiorespiratory capacity, balance, agility, speed, I'm missing the other 3 right now, but all of that to say that if we're only training heavy squats, heavy deadlift, heavy bench press, and finding different ways to only get stronger, we're not bringing ourselves into a good place of total fitness, and we could be into the Olympic lifts. We could be into powerlifting and doing competitions. We could be into bodybuilding and hypertrophy training, but what are we doing to, help our heart? What are we doing to help our muscular endurance? What about things that require some balance or coordination neuromuscularly? Those are other things to ask ourselves. And it doesn't mean that you have to make a huge 180 for your training, but how much time are you spending incorporating these factors to affect your health in a great way? And that was something that I really tried to make an emphasis on changing myself so that I could be a little bit more rounded with my fitness goals, and with the goals of clients too, just incorporating that sort of thing too. And last thing that I'll say as well, sort of on the same subject, is the fact that we drop the ball in the strength and conditioning world, I think, a lot when it comes to the subject of gaining strength. Why I say that is because it's important to be strong. It's important for a person who's just starting training to get stronger, and strength should be the primary concern of a lot of people. And it has the most spillover to a lot of other things too. Like, I believe that strength is a major factor in creating mobility for a person. However, a lot of times when people get to a certain level of capabilities as far as barbell strength goes, they start missing the message of what it should be all about. And they start forgetting the fact that, okay, I can pull 500. Now I'm going to go for 550, 600, and 625. This is a hobby for you now, man. It's not anything that is a dire necessity for you to continue. There's no added value to your life if you can pull 600 versus 575. That's never going to be something that's tested of you in your lifetime. I can guarantee it. Having said that, getting strong and then staying strong is very different than constantly trying to get stronger at all costs. That's where the law of diminishing returns comes into play. That's where you don't get too much more out of it for your life benefit. And people need to understand that and realize that if they want to live a life that's probably going to be a lot less injury riddled, then they might want to think about diversifying their goals and not just thinking about how can I do. Not every exercise in the world has to be geared toward making a progressive overload and getting stronger and stronger and stronger all the time. It's not a horrible thing to think of, but what about recalibrating our thoughts to think of, okay, there are other things I can get out of this too. There are other ways I can perform these reps to make lighter weight feel heavier. There's other things mentally that this can do for me, and so on and so forth. I think that can go a really, really long way for people. And that change in perspective takes a little bit of pressure off of yourself too. It helps you enjoy the ride a little bit better too.
Man, that segment right there, gold. You're speaking my language. All right, because I was taking notes on the points that you made that I want to just pull out here. Number one, look at the people that are where you would want to be. I don't know, when you're 60, when you're 70, and I don't think we get enough wisdom from people that have a ton of wisdom and are older and are literally Peter Attia calls it back casting, right? Where would you want to be when you're 70 and 80? All right, cool. If you're 40 now, this is the gap, but you're not where you're supposed to be when you're 40 to be here when you're 80, right? So your cardio sucks. You got to do a lot more aerobic capacity work, right? You got to do a lot more of this. Your balance isn't great. And which brings back exactly what you said. And I learned some of this in the last, I would say 5 years, which is, hey, I love being strong, but if I can maintain where I'm at, who gives a shit about going from this to that? It's just not worth it. But, you know, for me, I have this whole kind of, I keep saying it now of these last years of like, hey, I want to be an athlete for life. Love boxing, love playing basketball, you know, and to be able to do those things, you need a whole lot more, you know, that, hey, if you can deadlift 400 or whatever, doing more is not going to help you do the other things better. But doing, like, for instance, types of conditioning that will prepare your tissues, build tissue tolerance so you can go on a court and, you know, do 2 hours of ball once a week, or, you know, box or do this, that, the other, that's going to be a whole lot more important. And then about recovery strategies and, again, mobility and things of that nature, right? Or power work, which is so important for people as they age, because it's what they lose first. It's such a golden nugget. But the way that you said it makes so much sense. And I really, really hope that, you know, folks are like, hold up, you know, talked about 11 properties in fitness, and like, I'm not doing like 4 or 5. I'm not even doing shit for 4 or 5 of those. And it's like, guess what? Like they matter. And the more you age, the more you're going to see that if you don't work on them, how much they matter. Man, that right there is absolute gold. I'm not only assuming, because I watch your content and I saw the switch of you starting to do things where I was like, oh man, he wasn't talking about this as much before. Body weight movements, mobility. And I'm like, okay, cool. This is dope. But again, because you start going like, yeah, maybe I need to work more on that. And I've had all these realizations where I'm like, damn, I don't work enough on this. And, you know, I get to geek out every week because Joel Jameson is kind of my neighbor, you know, when we do these bench Sunday night sessions, and geek out on mitochondria and longevity and all this stuff, you know, and really the reality is that stuff that he was saying, you know, 20 years ago about zone, you know, they call it zone 2 now, but is that, you know, HRV and aerobic capacity, VO2 max, have one of the highest correlations to having, you know, you live basically about 10, 11% longer if you're in the highest VO2, like top 5% VO2 max. And, you know, cardio has always been like, all right, am I doing conditioning to burn calories, or am I, you know, doing conditioning for what's the purpose of it? But now it's really, no, it's like conditioning's for health. And you should do more lower intensity conditioning and less higher intensity conditioning, because we've kind of hit this hit world where everything is classes that just crush you into the ground with cardio. And I think it is such an important, you know, kind of, you got to zoom out and go like, well, listen, what do I want? Are the things that I'm doing getting me where I want to, especially, you know, in 10 years from now? Great. Right now, I you know, my ego loves it that I'm deadlifting 600, but 10 years from now, I'm going to wish that I like backed off just a bit and did a little bit more mobility, a little bit more cardio training. And now I can do all the shit I wanted to do, you know, even better. So I think that's an important question.
Yeah. The idea of how strong is strong enough was something it's a constant slide that even exists. I think it's a question in the book that I wrote as well. The how strong is strong enough, and things like your goals, your training age, all that other stuff that we talked about already, they play into it big time. What is the point of going for a double body weight squat as a strength standard, or a triple body weight deadlift, if you learned that standard was created by somebody who was like 160 pounds or something like that? How much more attainable is it for somebody like that versus somebody who's 6'8" and weighs 300? You know, you really think that a person 6'8", 300 is going to deadlift 900 just from a little bit of training? Like, no way, right? And so just the relative strength, the absolute strength versus relative strength, that kind of discussion plays in huge. You know, a person who is much more athletically inclined versus somebody who's not, it doesn't mean anything when it comes to their measures of fitness, right? And so that's sort of the angle that I like to look at things from. Like, there's so many different factors that are, again, at play when it comes to deciding what direction to go when it comes to training for fitness, training for strength, training for well-being and health. How much strength do you already have? How much more does somebody really need? Is it really only the big barbell movements that are a true expression of strength? I can take somebody who's doing a 550 deadlift and put them in a Chinese plank and they just fall like a bunch of cards, right? And that's a body weight exercise. So that is just to say that like there's so many different versions of expressing strength, and these conveniently loaded bars with a perfect grip and very balanced weights on either side and all that stuff, you know, the second that you make the handle thicker, all of a sudden people's strength goes to the pits. So it's just funny that we've made these expectations of ourselves or these goals for ourselves. And then when you translate that to the real world, I mean, possessing strength is an important thing, but when are you going to have handles on some kind of thing that you've got to lift? The funniest thing is the most real world application for most people ever in life when it comes to utilizing the strength that you train for. Let's be honest, if you're not an athlete, an everyday person's most direct application is going to come from helping somebody move furniture. That's the truth. Think of too many other scenarios. I can't think of too many other scenarios where somebody really has to use their strength and their size, whatever it is that they've built and all that work in the gym. If they're not like a construction worker or something like that, it's usually when somebody asks them to help them move, right? Moving heavy objects that are household. And so none of that comes with a nice handle or an easy, non-cumbersome way to hold on to this thing. You know, it involves more muscular endurance than it does strength half the time, because you're not just picking it up and putting it back down. You got to walk with this stuff. You got to carry it for 2 minutes, 3 minutes straight. You got to do all kinds of turning and twisting and put it on one shoulder and all that stuff. So it doesn't mean our training shouldn't involve those primal movement patterns, but like what other training can we possibly do to really make us ready for things in life that are real, you know? And that's where the question really comes to, how are we shifting our goals? How are we shifting our training so we can have longevity as a real part of the pie?
Man, such a great point. I actually think that into something that you mentioned now, I think should really be kind of plastered into the practical programming stuff. You know, when you go like, hey, are you doing stuff with KBs and sandbags and thinking about this stuff about who your client is? And like, yeah, look, let's make sure we have all the movement patterns that we need to have in there, but don't take this other stuff out because that's not how life is. And neither is sport, to be honest with you, right? Like, that's awesome, man. Like, I love it. You're saying so much great stuff, but I want to make sure I touch on things that I wanted to ask there. So from the coaching standpoint, and think about back then and now, right? So what helped you get more clients, right? And the thing is, has it even changed? Meaning like the things that you did before to get you busy versus the things that are happening, you know, now because you are writing, because you're a professor, did it change anything? And kind of like the main things that you would recommend for coaches to build their client, like their book of business.
When I was starting out, so this is going to 2007, that was my first year in the industry as a trainer and working for that commercial gym. And one thing that I could definitely be known for is getting on the gym floor and working the floor, basically. And I know it's something that a lot of people don't want to hear that because, you know, it might be nerve-wracking or they might not be that great at it and whatnot, but it makes you more comfortable in the climate, first and foremost. If you take yourself out of your shell, I'm not somebody who's really about going and talking to random people too often, that's for sure. But when the scenario called for it and, you know, we see somebody on the floor, you might want to help them with technique. You might want, like, sometimes I just walk up to them and say, so when do I get to train you? Simple as that, you know? And it's a ridiculous tactic, but it actually didn't do too bad. Just, it worked for what my personality was, what the energy was, and so on. And so it worked out. Now, other times it would be correcting somebody's form or giving them a free session or something along those lines. Don't be afraid to do some work for free if it means it can turn into a 10-year or 20-year lifetime client down the road. Like, that's fantastic. Maybe they won't sign up the same day, but they sign up later on, and it's all because of the time that you put into it, and it's all because of the fact that you didn't push the envelope with being salesy about it. Right. So anyway, all that to say that the one thing that I would do a lot of when I was much, much younger was work the gym floor and talk to members, build rapport in that way, and make it clear that I was willing to offer up my time to help somebody. And it's up to them what they want to do with that afterwards. So that was what I did before. I'm definitely in a different situation now in the sense of, well, I don't work for any one gym or anything like that. So I'm not stopping any members or anything like that. And I don't really like, I don't have to advertise all that much just because of the fact that most of my advertisement is coming from the writing work that I do. And there's a lot of it that's circulating, right? And so I get, the emails that are coming in from people who do want to work with me. If they happen to be in my city, then they'll do it in person. Usually it's, well, not usually, but a lot of the cases are online client questions and stuff like that. And so, I can't say that I'm some kind of a marketing genius or some kind of a master when it comes to here's my sales tactics. I don't really have that anymore. And it's a good problem to have because of just the fact that I've been able to put myself out there by way of what's been published about me and so on. Having said that, contacts and word of mouth referral is still, as far as in-person training goes, it's still the number one referral source. It's the number one way that a lot of clients have referred their friends, family members, and so on. And I also stay busy in that regard too, in that way as well. And so that's really been helpful. Keeping that rapport, making sure that you're doing your job the correct way, and showing up, being there, being on point. That's going to impress a client. Every trainer's client is going to think that their trainer is the best trainer that they've got. That's just how it goes. It's a very, very communication-based, personal-based industry. And it's so much hinging on relationships that if you can really, really master, wearing the right kind of hat with the right kind of person, and doesn't mean being an imposter version of yourself. It just means being some version of you that is still real and still holds true to you, but also aligns with that client so that they can really get the best out of their performance, get the best out of their interactions with you and so on. It's going to go a really long way. It'll probably lead to, okay, you know what? My friend wants to train with you. My colleague wants to train with you and so on. And they're going to spread the word about how great their experience is with you. And they're going to get results and so on and so forth. And it's just a great situation. Word of mouth is still, as far as in-person goes, that's the main winner for me.
Man, that's what I was leading to, because I mean, we didn't talk about you saying this, but foundationally, this is what it always comes back to. And I actually think it's because of social media. And look, I love social media, but because of it, the focus so many times escapes to like, if I can be known here, if my following grows, it's going to help my in-person. But what you're talking about is 10 times, 20 times more, not only productive, but more effective. And I think too many people are going away from that. And actually people need to triple down on that. Like, if I always say, if the internet collapses tomorrow because of some crazy shit happening, right? Like, would your business not only survive, but would it thrive? And if you're doing the things that you're talking about and that I believe are the most important, it will, maybe even more so, because then people would have to talk more. But I read somewhere it's like 93% of all the referrals are still offline, word of mouth. Talk to people, 93%. And funny story too is that when my friend Craig Ballantyne, like many years ago, was like, hey, do you know a great trainer in Toronto? I'm like, sure do. You know what I'm saying? Like straight up, and we were, I think we were either texting or on the phone. And it wasn't even like, I was like, hold up. I think Lee's in Toronto. I was like, I think Lee's in Toronto, and connected you guys. But literally that was it. Cause I knew that you're really good at what you do. Like I knew you're a good dude, like great at communication. I was like, boom, just like that right now, which definitely helps, I would say the writing part of it. And so I wanted to do a couple of things. I wanted to connect those to the communication and writing, but I did want to, how did you start writing, and some tips on not only the power of it. I think writing is really important because it's one of the 4 skills that I think that will forever, ever, money-making skills, practical skills that I don't give a shit what happens with technology. If you're a great writer, you can write better texts to, try to get a girl. You can write better copy. You can write better content. You can write, everything improves. And people are just like, writing doesn't matter as much anymore because of video, because of this. It's like bullshit. I think it's as powerful as ever. But how did you get into it? And what are maybe some things for somebody starting off that's like, hey, I do want to get into publication. What would you recommend?
I got into writing. Let me think. The first experience that I ever had with like reading stuff or training content and so on was when the fitness manager at the gym that I worked at, for the first place that I worked at, he was asking me like, like, why do you do these weird, not great exercises that don't get clients great results? Because I wasn't good. And then he was like, check out these websites, and they're probably going to help you out in terms of learning some stuff. And so one of them was DeFranco's training, which I thought was really good.
Oh, yeah.
Then the second one was bodybuilding.com. And I was like, okay, this is cool. And then the third one was TNATION.com, right? And so
the golden era back then too.
When I went to TNATION, like I liked every single one of the sites, but when I went to TNATION, I was like, man, this just seems like it's just different, man. This is all these different writers. They're so good. They seem like they're these unreachable figures that I want to be like them. I want to do this. And so I read, applied, brought it to the gym. Read, applied, brought it to the gym. I kept doing that. And after a while, I got better at training. And on top of that, I started noticing some trainers on staff who were copying some of the stuff that I was doing, right? Probably wondering where I got it from. And so I was like, okay, this is really good. So anyway, long story short, after like a year plus of reading TNATION stuff all the time, especially, and practicing it and copying it and so on, I said, I want to be like one of these guys, And so I reached out and I contacted Nate Green, who was the editor at that time.
Dude, that's so crazy.
Nate's
one of my close friends. Yeah.
I thought Nate Green was like the coolest dude ever because of the fact that he was like the youngest guy on their staff by a long shot too. And so I was like, man, we have something in common. I'm like 22, 23. And he's got to be like 25 or 6. Like, this is amazing. Like, let me try to align with him and see what he thinks about my ideas and so on. Anyway, long story short, he replied to me. And then, after 1,000,001 pitches, he finally took one and it turned into a small column and a part of a article series called Mythbusters. And so that was my first little break into TNATION. And I said to myself, listen, I'm not the type of guy who wants to just be a one hit wonder type of thing. I want to keep on doing this. And so I tried to I made a goal of trying to be in there once every month. And then I got in there once every month after a while in terms of frequency. And the rest is kind of history. I've written a bunch for them and a bunch of other places too, of course. So that's what it really sort of started out as. And now to answer the second part of the question, which was any advice for young writers, I would say, number one, stick with what you know, because that's going to go the furthest as far as, the sincerity, the knowledge that you have to express on it as well. I'm pulling from mistakes that I've made in the past. I'm thinking about all these things while I say this stuff. Sticking with what you know and staying in your lane is going to be paramount for you. You might not be as funny as you think you are in your writing, so you don't have to go over the top with humor all the time. Just keep it sincere and honest, and it's going to be pretty good too. And yeah, if you can do those two things first and foremost, then there's going to be an audience for you, and it's going to grow just based on that sincerity and them knowing what they're going to expect when they read your content. If you're a bodybuilder and you're talking all about Olympic lifting all the time, there's going to be so many holes people can poke in that stuff first and foremost, and it's probably not going to be too in-depth either, right? But if you're a bodybuilder and you've been bodybuilding and you talk about bodybuilding, people are either going to be like, I don't want to learn about bodybuilding, or there's going to be a contingent of people who say, man, this is great. Bodybuilding from a top expert in bodybuilding, let me at this. And so I think that that's going to be the best way. Like, I've got to say that as a 6'4" guy, the last like 7 or so years talking about, taller lifters and leverages and all that sort of stuff that hindrances me in the working out space and so on. Like, I mean, the audience didn't start out that big, but then it grew and grew and grew and grew. And like, there's a lot more of traction that is surrounding the subject of anthropometry and leverages. And it's not all I talk about, but now it comprises a whole lot of what I talk about. And that's very different than it was 10 years ago for me. So it's in the same vein of just sticking with what you know, sticking with what's close to you and what you have the most experience with. It's going to go a long way. And the sincerity and passion can't not show through. So that's something that I like to apply my own self as well.
Those are great points. And I think that too, just writing, and, a lot of times I remember I wanted to start getting into the same as you. This was so crazy. Right behind me on this bookshelf, this is kind of like my podcast from bookshelf. I have like 3 folders that are as thick as can be, and they're all printed TNATION articles that I would just start putting in folders that were like, oh, this one's really important, this one's good. And it's thousands and thousands of pages, and this from like 2005, right? So it's like from way back then. And I was like, oh, I want to write for, TNATION. And I would start writing. but like not get accepted. And Nate has been a really good friend of mine for like a long time. Even when he was at TNATION, he was like, you got to, you can't write about training and back pain because we got McGill writing about that, right? Like if you're young but so I'd write articles, they wouldn't get published there, and I'd put them on my own blog, right? And I'd keep creating content. It would still go out there, still write about, your philosophy, your beliefs, your insights. And I mean, now back then you didn't have Facebook or social or, all this stuff, but you can put it in your email marketing. You can put it on your blog. But what you're doing is still distilling your thoughts, helping you get better at writing. One of the things I did was I would copy, and because Nate was always a really excellent writer. So, he helped me a lot even back then growing up, and Adam Bornstein was another one. But what I would do is I would copy their formats, not what they were writing, but I'm like, oh, he's doing subheadlines. All right, cool. I'm going to do subheadlines, right? They're doing this. I'm going to do that. Oh, they put a quote. So I would basically copy the format, but then just put all of my own thoughts and mirror it. And it helped me get way better, way faster, because I was like, these guys are writing really well and have way more experience. So let me do some of the things that they're doing. And from there, I would actually get asked, hey, would you write an article here? Would you write an article there? And, crazy that like for a while, I mean, I've been writing a ton these last years, but a lot of the publications that I was like, I wish I could get on there, from TNATION to Must on Fitness, like they asked me to write stuff, which is cool. And now I got the bug back again. But I think that the key is that like I wrote hundreds of blog posts back then, and it was like 2 years before anybody ever asked me to, write for their site. But what those hundreds of blog posts did, it made me a better writer, and it made me distill my thoughts way more clearly, because writing you have to do that, or it just is a clusterfuck, right? So you don't want it to be like that. And it made me better at articulating stuff to clients, because you have to write for the reader. So definitely that. Now, that leading to, because writing is communication, and I definitely want to finish on this note and your thoughts about this, because communication is so important when it comes to training people. What, one, where do you feel that you got the most knowledge, experience, and improvement with communication? Now, obviously using it, but where were the kind of those points where you're like, man, I need to be a better communicator with my clients? And then where did you go learn? Like, where did you pick up the most valuable, I would say, insights for that?
It's a good question. I think that the times that the thinking about that was challenged the most came from when I had some kind of an issue with a client, And if you're in the industry for enough time, or you see enough clients, you're going to have more than a few clients who aren't happy with you, who disagree with something, or who money back, or whatever it is. And so I've been in that situation, especially as a private trainer who's not working for a company. That happens, right? And whenever you do have a clash with a client, that definitely makes me look back and say, what did I do wrong? Like, what did I do to make this friction happen? How did I screw this up? And so that's definitely sort of like the thing that was the inkling thing that sort of like made me question it. It's always been some kind of clash with clients most of the time. But as far as what kinds of things I think that I would say that the main thing that I would do is I would look at the communication methods of people who weren't in my industry at all. Whether it was somebody who was a public figure who deals with a lot of debates and the debate topics and whatnot, how do they deal with that sort of thing? How do they resolve problems? How do they find common ground to resolve conflicts and so on? Those kinds of things. What kinds of things do they use even when there is no conflict to make their method of communication very clear? Why do I like them so much as far as that goes? Even certain things that I read, because again, talking about writing and all that stuff, if I was to read the things that I wrote 12, 13 years ago when I started compared to now, I'd be like, it's a bit of a cringe as far as how I try to communicate this subject, or I wouldn't have said it this way now. But looking at the way that certain people write, or certain things, certain subjects about certain topics, these are things that I would definitely learn from, definitely see the method in communication, whether it was making things more succinct, whether it was saying more about a subject or deep diving into something that could cause friction and then explaining yourself more clearly. Or maybe taking something that you use a paragraph to describe and whittling it down to 1 or 2 sentences so that it's more succinct. Do I use lengthy verbose messages in email form? Or do I say, you know what? Let's talk in person about that. That's a huge, huge one, I have to say. The idea of trying to get your thoughts out and not realizing what tone could come across in an email versus saying, you know what, let's get on the phone at the very end, or let's get face to face and talk about this. A lot of times when people are really fired up and they're angry about something and it comes out in the email, and then you say, let's meet face to face, they show a different face. And it's sort of, I don't want to say it's me calling them out or, like, okay, see how bad you are. Let's see you face to face so you can say, it's not that it's that, but it kind of is at the same time, because once somebody's faced with you, all of a sudden it can really, really dissolve a major tense tone. And that's what I like to do very often. So as far as communication, especially when it comes in the name of conflict or being able to get your thoughts across in a certain way with a certain manner, I really, really encourage face-to-face. And it's probably one of the reasons why I prefer doing things like teaching and all that sort of thing and doing talks. People ask about virtual, do you want to join this virtual conference? I kind of want to do it face-to-face, man. I'd rather be there in person. So why don't we do it next year instead? And things like that are very important to me. And they've become a lot more important to me than they used to be. So I really value that face-to-face or that in-person contact much more than the written word or a video or anything like that can ever do.
Man, I'm with you. I think I've kind of realized that, even, and I do a lot of online things as far as business goes as well, but I mean, I'm a brick and mortar person because of community, because of people, because of face-to-face. And I think it's part of the issue, today is that less and less people resolve things face-to-face. And so it's so much easier to misunderstand tone, body language, and everything else through a text, through social media, through, written word, that there's a misunderstanding and a narrative in somebody's head that they create and kind of keep going down on. And, now all of a sudden you got this thing that escalated that honestly, if you just met face-to-face, I think 9 out of 10 times wouldn't escalate. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So that's a really, really good point. I think that, like, hey, anytime you're pissed off at somebody, meet with them. And I think you'll be way better off. The last thing is, I could talk to you for hours, man. Like we definitely have a lot of things in common, and geek out on this stuff. But I really want to know that where you at right now, just something, if it's a thing or two that you're learning and it is exciting you, you've kind of dove into, and you're like, man, like I want to learn more about this, and I'm fired up about it. Is there something that pops up right now for you?
The first thing that comes to mind right away is more on the psychology and mindset side of things, more so than anything that's really physical. Whether you want to call that stuff like meditation, but just like being able to really zone in on a certain thoughts and how that can affect your entire body. So, I won't even get into the fine details about it, but we're talking about things that, you might be dealing with, different issues that you might be dealing with in terms of like your body, your mind, your head, like just all kinds of stuff. And being able to focus in on stuff like your breathing and realize how powerful breathing is for your entire nervous system and what it can do. I've recently learned that the vagus nerve is extremely, extremely impactful on things that involve your head, things that involve even like your heart, your lungs, that touches so much stuff. And so it's very much influenced by things like your breathing and the methods, the way in which you're breathing, how deeply you're breathing, how calmly, all that sort of stuff. And so I'm like very, very short into it so far. But that recent exposure I've gotten to that kind of information has been helpful to know first and foremost. And it's been something I've been trying to work on too. Am I breathing through my chest? Am I breathing through my diaphragm? How am I really, really taking in oxygen? And how is that affecting the way that I'm feeling? When I get this head pressure and I'm feeling headachy, or I'm feeling like I can't tie my shoe without feeling my head's going to explode, why is that happening? What's going on? Is it something that's musculoskeletal, or is it something that's a little bit more like, visceral? Is it my breathing? Is it my nerves? Is it my neurology? So anyway, all that to say that, that sort of side of things, the mindset, breathing, meditation, being able to focus, to de-stress and take stress out of the picture, and tactics you can use to do that that's very interesting to me as of right now.
Oh, yeah, I'm always on the same page with that. I mean, I think that the coolest part that happened for me in training, you know, I think the first 6-7 years was just like X's and O's, program design, just geeking out on that shit, you know. And then it was like, all right, I got to dial in on nutrition, and I started doing nutrition. And then it was a personal life experience that got me into I would say mindset. Like, I got divorced, I was doing stupid shit. Well, I've done stupid shit in my life numerous times when I was young, but then even later, and I had to like kind of raise my hand and say, hey, I need help. Like, why do people do the things that they do? You know, they're dumb, you know. And I went into, I mean, I got therapy, and then I started diving into the psychology and neurology, like, you know, and that, I think that made me a way better coach than any of the X's and O's. And I love the X's and O's stuff, but it's like, that was the whole next level. Behavior change patterns that we have, the subconscious mind. And again, that taps also into like breathing and, you know, doing Wim Hof stuff. And I've done 3 days with the Shia monks on meditation. I mean, I kind of dove into all that stuff and learned so much, because you start realizing that there's so many facets of the puzzle piece. And if we understand this better, we can help our clients better.
Yep.
You know, because it might be their stress is always through the roof. Well,
Yeah.
sure, we can manage training. That's one part of it. But what if we can improve their sleep and help with nutrition and give them strategies in a toolbox to calm down more often, become aware of things that are, you know, in their environment that are not helping them, but are derailing them. Like,
Yeah.
and I think that's just a lifelong journey as a coach. And, you know, and I feel as excited as ever to learn now than I did before, you know, and feel that's why you go down that rabbit hole and you go like, I don't know shit. All right, I gotta keep learning. Right. So I'm glad that you shared that everybody sees that, man. Like, you've been in this game for a long time, and you're also always like learning and looking to improve. And, you know, that's always inspirational to hear from people that have been in the game for it, man.
Yeah, you know, you're training for it's a life kind of industry, in the sense that like the things that you learn often are things that you've had challenges with or you dealt with yourself. For example, like talking about people and rehabbing from injuries and so on. The amount that I can help somebody now compared to pre-2017 with that knee injury stuff, like, it's a huge difference now. And like, when you have that firsthand insight to it, it might not have been a situation you want to go through, but you can treat anything that happens to your body as a way that you can translate that into a learning experience for clients, just based on the type of industry that we happen to be in. And it's a great opportunity in a way. So even with the stuff that I was detailing just now with the head and all that stuff, like, I'm looking at it as, well, look, now I'm going to learn more about nerves. I'm going to learn more about breathing. I'm going to learn more about this. And I know there's going to be clients that can benefit from this too. You know, the amount of people who have contacted me since 2017, or I guess 2018, when I publicized it, about, hey, I ruptured my patellar tendon. Do you know what the rehab process is like? Hey, I had this injury, same as you, or I have other knee stuff or whatnot. Come out of the woodwork. Like, I can't even believe that injury is so prevalent as it is. I've had clients who've reached out to me and seen me in person saying, listen, I'm 1 year post-operation on the same injury to one of my legs. Can we work together? So I work with them. I see how they're doing. And I can tell them very specific things about what to expect, what's going on, what they're doing wrong, and so on, because I literally lived this. And so, yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's sort of like a bittersweet side of things, because you can make lemonade out of the worst experiences that you might have in whether it's life, psychology, whether it's physical stuff or whatnot. And you can turn that into being able to really, really help a lot of people who are dealing with the same thing.
Superpower. I always say, man, like, that your struggles are kind of like these steps that you can build on. If you frame it that way and understand that, right? Like, you actually now have more experience, more wisdom, and now you can use it to help others. Dude, I love it, man. This was absolute fire. I want to make sure for anybody that does, I mean, I feel like you got to know Lee, but if not, like, where can people find out about you? Like, where do you share the most information or reach out to you?
I try to make things across as many platforms as possible. I try to make everything that I post, that I get published on, for example, on the internet, available on my website. So my website's leeboyce.com. That has an archive of like a whole bunch of stuff. So all my published articles, I write blog articles on that website as well. So every couple of months, I'll put something out that has to do with more of my thoughts on social cultural aspects of fitness as a whole. So that's going on strong. I do online coaching there as well and all that. But then on my social, so Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, I got Coach Lee Boyce, and no imposter sites, just Coach Lee Boyce, spelled as my name. That is where I will post a lot of stuff. I'm most commonly on Instagram these days as far as sharing content on the daily. So that's where you want to find me on that. And, Twitter and Facebook, I still have stuff going on there as well. So you can find my articles published on there as well, or shared on there as well. And any other content that I like to put out. Some of it is the same as the other platforms as far as I might share something on Instagram as Twitter, as Facebook, but sometimes it's some unique stuff as well. So it's good to follow me on all three.
I love it, man. I definitely want to put it this way. We're still kind of figuring out the summit situation, have you down for that. But honestly, I'd love to have you down for an in-staff for the team and shoot a whole bunch of YouTube stuff, which I go pretty hard on these days as well. So much knowledge. Hey, also, by the time this drops, it'll be close to it. Can they pre-order the book yet?
Yeah, it's actually out for pre-order. I'm glad you asked. That's on Amazon right now. I believe I saw the link just this week. So on Amazon, I just typed my name and lifting and leverages and stuff like that. The book is called Strength Training for All Body Types: The Science of Lifting and Levers. That's what it's called. And it's by Human Kinetics. So it should be very, very easily findable on Amazon. And it's also on Barnes & Noble's website. It's on a few other websites as well. So you will be able to find it on the internet for sure. But obviously most commonly Amazon. And it's out for pre-order. The official release date of the book is December 1st. So it's going to be out in just a few short weeks otherwise. But you can pre-order it, and then it's going to come to you shortly anyway.
Awesome. Yeah, this is going to be punching out next week. So we'll put the link in the show notes for the book. I'll obviously also share it on social, and then I'm going to probably buy a whole bunch for my team right now, pre-order. So
wicked.
Bada boom, bada bing. Hey, Lee,
shout out to Melody Schoenfeld, by the way, my co-author, because she's a machine, and she's a research machine as well when it comes to all that stuff. Couldn't have done that without her. So I'm really glad to have worked on that project with her. It was a really, really good run. About 2 years in the making. So it was great.
Damn, I feel you on that. Hey, that's all. I've heard that before, that she is a research machine, which is dope. So shout out to Melanie as well. Lee, thank you so much, bro. This was phenomenal. Definitely going to do this again, because I feel like as we've been talking, I'm like, oh, we could have dove down a couple different rabbit holes and spent the whole podcast on that. But yeah, thank you so much, brother. Appreciate you, and look forward to seeing you.
Nice, man. Appreciate that too. And I'm looking forward to the next time.
Yes, sir.